Good evening or good morning, wherever you are in the world. I'm Regina Yao, the founder and president of the Pixel Project, and I'm moderating the 7th YouTube session of the 6th International Women's Day edition of our Read for Pixels campaign. So through Read for Pixels, the Pixel Project is collaborating with 17 award-winning, best-selling women writers to raise awareness about violence against women and to raise funds for the Pixel Project to keep our efforts to end violence against women alive and kicking, and to help us reveal the mystery celebrity male role model portrait in our celebrity male role model Pixel Reveal campaign. And we'll be telling you more about the Read for Pixels fundraiser, which has a ton of exclusive author goodies. And you can find out more about the Pixel Project and violence against women and what to do about it by visiting www.thepixelproject.net. So today we have a really special guest for our Read for Pixels discussion and Q&A session. It's the fabulous YA fantasy author Roshani Chokshi.
Hello.
Now, hi, Roshani. So Roshani is the New York Times best-selling author of Arusha and the End of Time, The Star-Touched Queen, A Crown of Wishes, and The Gilded Wolves. Her work has been nominated for the Locus and Nebula Awards and has frequently appeared on the Best of the Year lists from Barnes & Noble, BuzzFeed, and more. Roshani lives in Georgia but doesn't have much of a southern accent, alas. Her next book, The Silvered Serpents, will be released in, is it September this year, Roshani?
It is, yes.
Yeah. And Roshani has also generously donated a gorgeous Arusha hardcover book bundle. She'll sign and personalize it. And it's up at the fundraising page, the donation page where we have all the perks for donors. It's over on Rally Up. And we'll share a little slide at the end of the session to show you where to go to donate to get the book bundle. And she only has one book bundle. So you guys have to hurry up when you at the end of the session, go to the donation page, go get it, because once someone gets it, it's gone. And the good news is we've raised $5,355 so far, and this means that we have shot past our initial $5,000 goal, and we are now aiming to reach our stretch goal, which is $10,000, to make up for last year's fundraising shortfall. So please give generously. All funds go towards the Pixel Project's book and violence against women, including programs like this one where we have Roshani on. And if you are watching this session on YouTube right now, you will also be able to ask Roshani questions live. Just make sure you are logged into your YouTube account, and you can type your questions into the chat box next to the screen. And Xiaoqin and Michelle, who are today's producers and chat box moderators, will relay them to me to read out to Roshani to answer. And now, over to Roshani, who will be kicking off the session with a reading. Welcome to Read for Pixels, Roshani.
Thank you so much for having me. So today I'm going to be reading a little bit of A Crown of Wishes. A Crown of Wishes is the companion novel to The Star-Touched Queen, and it is about Maya's younger sister, Gauri, who is quite possibly one of my favorite characters. All right. My sister's necklace was more than a jewel. The day Maya returned to Bharata, I hadn't recognized her. My sister had changed, as if she had torn off the filmy reality of one world and glimpsed something greater beneath it. But then she disappeared, darting between the space of a moonbeam and a shadow. The necklace was a reminder to live for myself the way Maya had. But it was also a reminder of loss. Vast and unwieldy magic had stolen away my sister. And every time I looked at the pendant, I remembered not to place faith in things I couldn't control. The necklace told me to place my faith in myself, nothing and no one else. I didn't just want to believe in everything the necklace meant. I needed those reminders, and I would die before I parted with it. I rather like the look of that necklace myself. Maybe I'll keep it, said the attendant. Give it, now. The attendant grabbed at the necklace. Even though her arms were thin, her fingers were strong. She pinched my skin, scrabbling at the clasp. Give it to me, she hissed. She aimed a bony elbow at my neck, but I blocked the jab. I don't want to hurt you. You can't hurt me. The guards told me how weak you truly are. Besides, you're no one here, said the attendant. Her eyes were bright, as if touched with fever. Give me the necklace. What does it matter to you after all you took? Isn't that the least I can take away from you? One damned necklace. Her words stung. I took no pleasure in killing, but I had never hesitated to choose my life over another's. My apologies, I said hoarsely, knocking her hand away from my neck. I'd been gentle before, careful not to harm the skinny and heartbroken thing standing in front of me. This time she lurched back, shock and fury lighting up her space. Maybe the girl had lost her lover, or her betrothed, or her father or brother. I couldn't let myself care. I'd learned that lesson young. Once, I'd freed the birds in the harem menagerie. When Skanda found out, he covered the floor with ripped wings and told me the cage was the safest place for foolish birds. Another time, Skanda had punished Mother Dina and forbade the palace cooks from sending her any dinner. I gave her half of mine, and he starved me for a week. Those were just the instances where I was the only person hurt. My brother had taught me many things, but nothing more important than one. Selfishness meant survival. Caring had cost my future. Caring had trapped me under Skanda's thumb and forced my hand. Caring had robbed my throne and damned all that I had held dear. That was all that mattered. The attendant lunged forward and I reacted. Hooking my foot behind her calf, I tugged. I swung out with my right fist, harder than I should have, harder than I needed to, until my hand connected with her face. She fell back with a hurt yelp, knocking over a slim golden table. A cloud of perfume burst in the air. In that moment, the world tasted like sugar and roses and blood. I stepped back, my chest heaving. I waited for her to stand and fight, but she didn't. She sat there with her legs crossed beneath her, her arms wrapped around her thin rib cage. She was sobbing. You took my brother. He was not yours to take. He was mine, said the girl. Her voice sounded muddled, young. Tears streaked her cheeks. You're a monster, she said. I secured the necklace. We all have to be something.
Thank you so much, Roshani. And now let's start our discussion session. So before we start that, just a reminder that welcome to everybody if you've just joined us. If you would like to ask Roshani questions, we'll be here for the next about 50 minutes. Just type your question into the chat box next to the screen. Make sure you're logged into YouTube, and Xiaoqin or Michelle, today's producers, to relay them to us to ask Roshani, and Roshani will answer them live. So you got about 50 minutes and go. So let's start with the discussion. So your books feature plenty of fantastic and empowered female characters like Maya, Gauri, and Arusha. And they are complex characters with agency, and they are also women and girls of color, specifically Asian women. What or who are your inspirations for your female characters?
So for me, honestly, the biggest inspiration for my female characters are the female relatives in my life. I am so very fortunate to have grown up with incredible, strong women all around me. My mom is a huge inspiration to me. She immigrated from the Philippines when she was in her late 20s. And she, conquered English as a second language. She worked as a nurse. And then when she met my dad, she raised me and my two siblings. And she's just always been a presence of extraordinary perspective. And I'm extremely close to my grandmother on my father's side. My grandmother on my mother's side unfortunately passed away, but she was also an extraordinary woman. And my Indian grandmother, every single time I saw her, she would read me stories every single day. And it was so special to me. The lullabies that she told us, the bedtime stories that were actually fairly bloody and a little scary and strange. And what I am so appreciative about for the women in my life is that they have always encouraged me not to be afraid to take up space in the world and to feel always that it is my due and that my voice stands for something and that the stories I want to tell should not be muted or hidden just because of who I am or what I look like.
That's awesome. And it's such an important lesson, right? In a world that doesn't want women to take up space in it. That is something that we need to teach. The lesson that your grandma taught you is something that, girls coming up today, we need to let them know too, this is your world too. You are not just allowed to take up space in it. It's your due to take up space in it.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, continuing from that, all fantasy genres have their share of female stereotypes and tropes. With women of color heroines like Maya and Arusha, it's not a stretch to deduce that the risk of stereotyping is doubled because they're at the intersection of gender, culture, and race. So how do you break stereotypes to create Asian female characters with agency when dealing with the world around them, including situations that involve sexism, misogyny, and violence against women?
Well, actually, it's interesting because I think my best example of that comes from A Crown of Wishes. So Gowri is a warrior princess, right? She's really extremely good at fighting and all sorts of things. When I wanted to write her, I really wanted to push back against this space in young adult literature where we consider a female character strong, but only if she exhibits male characteristics, meaning, is she extremely physically able? Is she good at being violent? That sort of thing. If she demonstrates brute force, is that the only thing that makes her a, quote, strong woman? And even though Gowri has those capabilities, she is kick-ass and all these things, and it's wonderful, what she never neglects to celebrate is her femininity. And one thing that I really want to push against with a lot of my female characters, it's in Aru, Maya, Layla and the Gilded Wolves, Gowri obviously from A Crown of Wishes, is that I wanted to show that being a woman, however you identify as that, is a celebration of nuance, and that you can claim that space of womanhood and strength and femininity in a multitude of ways. And you should not feel restricted or think that embodying one characteristic, like the, quote, strong female character, just because you're good at physical martial arts or something like that, means that you that it's to the exclusion of other characteristics.
Do you ever feel pressured by gender and cultural stereotypes to make your female characters likable, as the term goes, particularly with the whole Asian women are submissive stereotype that's still really stubbornly hanging around?
Oh my gosh, yeah. That sometimes comes up even when, it's interesting because some things that people see as submissive, I have always just found as a demonstration of strength of caretaking. I remember somebody not very kindly saying that my mom was just always running back and forth between like guests and the kitchen, and she wasn't really sitting down, and she was just, constantly looking after other people. And I'm thinking to myself, that actually, one, does not make her passive, and two, is actually just a strength of, it's an example of how strong her love is, that she just cares so deeply about people. And it was something that I really wanted to play with in my work. For example, Layla, who is an Indian courtesan and dancer in the Gilded Wolves, is really much a mama bear, she reminds me of my own mom in so many ways. Like, you can't walk past her with an empty plate. She will put food on it, and make sure that you're well fed and that you're taken care of and all these things. But it also comes from a really strong protective instinct. And when I thought about what it means to have a likable character, I really think about it more in terms of how much does this character like themselves? And that's a really important thing to me, instead, a way of like changing the narrative around it. I've gotten a lot of pushback in terms of Aru's character. She's a sassy little fiend. She is wild. She'll probably quote movies at you for 3 hours if you let her, and she's a bit salty. But her sass is her love letter to herself. It's the way that she finds enjoyment and pleasure. And so, yeah, I don't really think so much anymore about whether or not other people are going to like a character, because really what it comes down to for those characters and for so many women is whether or not you like you.
Yeah, and when you mentioned about your your mom with, you know, the gas in the kitchen, and your character with feeding people, and that I'm Asian too. So it's like, it reminds me of my grandmother. You know, she survived a half-century marriage of domestic, where there was domestic violence, and her concern with her grandkids and kids still, you know, have you had enough to eat? You know, and if you don't know the story, you know, it's so much more strength than a lot of people had, you know, when she was alive, gave her credit for, just because they see her in the kitchen. But you see, the kitchen is where women talk.
Yes, the kitchen is a place of power, and I love that. Yeah, so when people assume that the fact that we're thoughtful, that's not submissive. It's just another version of power that some people just can't appreciate.
Yeah. And, you know, speaking of Aru, we have a soft spot for her because she is a very relatable hero of her own story, and she goes on magical adventures that are normally reserved for boy protagonists. And furthermore, she's also a young female Asian protagonist, and her active participation in adventures outside of the home will be frowned upon by more traditional Asian families. What is the reaction of the readership to Aru?
Well, for the most part, people have really loved Aru in a way that is so humbling. When we hit the New York Times bestselling list, I cried so much, but it didn't make me cry as hard as when I saw a little kid come up to me in a signing line and tell me that she and her friends had dressed up as Aru and Minnie and Bryn for Halloween. And knowing that those young readers can see themselves in those books and in those characters, that's all I've wanted. You know, when we write, particularly as women of color, and we're trying to write our stories, we don't necessarily want stories that are all about pain or all like only about the ways in which we are marginalized. What I wanted, at least, was just to see my life experience celebrated in a way that I wasn't drawing so much attention to the ways I was different, but instead the ways in which I was so similar to other people. So, yeah, the response to Aru has just been unimaginable. I didn't even know how to dream about a book like this being able to find a home and find a space on shelves and in so many readers' hearts. So I am extraordinarily grateful.
Yeah. We have some questions from the audience, so let's get to some of them now. So Ekaterina Loeffler says, "Hi, who was your favorite character to write in The Gilded Wolves and why?"
Ooh, first of all, I love this name. It's so beautiful. Honestly, my favorite character to write in The Gilded Wolves was Enrique Mercado Lopez, who is the historian. And I thought about him a lot. I think in some ways I have the most in common with Enrique. I am definitely the friend that's like, wow, did you see this random article in the Washington Post or the Economist? Let me send it to you and quiz you all about it. Or talk to somebody about the historical etymology of a one word or another. In that ways, our personalities are very similar. But the other reason why I really loved writing Enrique is because we're very similar in the sense that we're both mixed race. My dad's from India, my mom's from the Philippines. His father is Spanish, his mother is indigenous Filipino. And when you're growing up in that mixed race space, you're often unsure of what sphere you occupy at one given moment in time. You sometimes feel like you don't belong to either. And that was something I really wanted to explore with his character.
Okay, so the next question is by Keta Norton. And how did you come up with the character of Hypnos? Because I love him so much.
Oh my gosh, Hypnos. I gotta tell you, so Hypnos was not, he was not supposed to be on the page this long. He just was that character that I wrote, and I had imagined him being like an extraordinary villain and all these things. And then I put him on the page, and this fool just like wants friends and is going about it in quite possibly the worst way. And he just became so strangely endearing, and so I love him too. And yeah, that's kind of I came up with him. I have a soft spot for friendly monsters, for soft-hearted monsters, you know, something like that. And so for Hypnos, he was a little bit of glamour, a little bit of villainy, and a little bit of longing, all rolled up into someone who became intensely lovable.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so speaking of male characters, some of the male-female relationships and partnerships between the main characters in your books are generally quite equitable. For example, Maya and Ama, Gary and Vikram. However, this is still not as common in fantasy as one would hope at this point in the 21st century. What do you want your readers to take away from this, especially if they're teenagers reading your books?
I would ask them that at every step of the way and in life, they do not settle. I think, one of my favorite things to write are budding romantic relationships. And in particular, I loved writing Gauri and Vikram. I thought the opposing energies they had in each other made for extremely fun banter, but also a lot of learning experiences. And the same thing with Amar and Maya. He saw her from the get-go as an equal. And there's a concept that I came across when I was reading a craft book about romance. It's called Romancing the Beat by Gwen Hayes, and it's an excellent read. But what she talks about is in romance, how it's the movement from being half-hearted to wholehearted. And I really, really love that, because that's what I think a relationship between men and women, particularly in books, or especially if it's romantic, that's how it should be. It should be one where they make you a better person, not where they bring you down or cultivate an environment of emotional dependency. And so I would hope that for my younger readers, what they take away from that is to choose people who amplify your strength and don't sap it up.
Yeah, and speaking of romance, the line between consent and coercion isn't always very clear in fantasy books, whether it's epic fantasy, urban fantasy, or paranormal romance, or YA fantasy. Do you think this is an issue that writers in the genre have started tackling successfully in recent years?
Oh, yeah. I think that writers have done such a good job of how we tackle those dynamics. And one thing that I've been really excited to see, like I really love younger age YA books, like for the 13 and up range. But what's been really satisfying is with more mature young adult books. For example, I do consider The Gilded Wolves a fairly mature book. The characters start off a bit older, etc. But what's really important for those relationships, I think, is also how they depict intimacy, physical intimacy, and what that line of true consent looks like. And that so often, for something to be fruitful and for someone else to feel safe in those experiences, you must have real trust. And so I've been really, really excited to see how writers have been tackling those conversations.
Yeah. So we're still talking about, you've talked about some of your male characters. Do you think reframing how stories describe men and boys away from hostile and toxic stereotypes and towards complexity and even vulnerability can be one of the ways that fantasy writers can break away from toxic tropes that promote, aggression and emotional distance and all that toxic masculine stuff and the dehumanization of women?
Could you rephrase the question one more time? I was like, I was like caught up in the brilliance of what you were saying. I was like, yes, I totally agree. Then follow with, oh no, wait.
Okay, so let's rephrase this. It's basically, do you think that reframing how men and boys are described in stories, instead of falling back on hostile and toxic stereotypes, like alpha males, and instead working towards portraying them as complex and vulnerable?
Yeah.
Do you think that could be one of the ways that fantasy authors can help dismantle toxic masculinity and also sort of head off the dehumanization of women?
Absolutely. One of the characters that I've had the most fun writing recently is a boy named Aiden Acharya, who appears in the Arisha on the End of Time series. One of the things that was so rewarding to write about Aiden was that his power came from his mother's side. And in particular, his mother is an Apsara, which is a celestial nymph, meaning that she's considered a femme fatale, as a person with powers of seduction. And I wanted to give those extremely feminine power things to her son. So those are the sort of powers that Aiden has. And I really have enjoyed seeing how he feels comfortable or even recoils from what it means to have control over somebody in that way. And also for a lot of his vulnerabilities to be on display. If you change the power that you give to a boy, make it perhaps one of empathy versus fire wielding or something else, you bring out a different dimension, not just in how they want to interact with people, but how they may feel responsibility over the power that's been given to them.
Okay, so let's talk about writing and stories. And writing and stories are one of the most powerful ways of bringing about cultural change, because even before humankind learned to write, we're passing our traditions and our experiences down, verbally. Or we use oral stories to pass it down. So stories have always been the way we all make sense of the world. So before I start on the discussion questions, there are a few writing questions from the audience.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so let's do this. So Misty306 says, which came first for you when writing these books, the characters, the world building, or the influences for both?
Oh boy. I would say this is weird because not weird. It's like, I feel like sometimes it's all at once, right? Like I think about a character that's in a certain situation, then I have to think about the world around them that would have allowed the situation to happen in the first place. And then both of them just sort of melt into each other like a really excellent pasta sauce. And then it becomes a book that you then eat as if it were a bowl of pasta. I'll go with that.
You are the first author who likens writing a book to making pasta sauce. That's a good analogy, actually.
There's a lot of things in it, right? And like sometimes with those pasta sauce elements, there's a lot of subtleties. You're like, oh, is that a bit of fennel or some more cumin than I expected or something like that? And in your own head, it could be that cumin is actually a stand-in for, here are the influences of the Ottoman Imperial Empire that have found their way into the world building or something else, who knows? But it's, I feel like they both inform one or the other.
Okay, so Rami Katea asks, how do you envision such words that make this book?
Oh, that's a very kind compliment. Thank you so much. When I think about the prose that goes into books and stuff, I often fall back on some of my favorite authors who I think have such a distinctive style. For example, Laini Taylor, extraordinary. Catherine Valenti, extraordinary. And I remember one line from a book that I really enjoyed. It's Anthony Doerr's All the Light We Cannot See. And in it, there's a blind character who, she's living during the time of great shortages, I think in World War I or World War II. And someone has found canned peaches, and she has not eaten a peach in forever. And he describes it as, it tasted like wet sunlight. And I loved that phrase. It was magical. It conveyed a sense of vastness in such an economy of words. And so when I start getting down to the prose level revisions of a book, I really do try to think about how's a different way that I can express this with a shorter amount of words. What is something that instead of just like endlessly describing the sky or something else, how does it feel to someone? Because I think especially if your style tends to be a little bit more flowery like my own, you get a lot more bang for your buck or a lot more of a punch out of those words when you try to make them emotional and not just descriptive. I hope that helps.
Okay, so we've got more questions coming, but we'll go to our discussion now about stories. And we'll get back to more of your questions in just a little bit, everybody. So stories are one of the most powerful ways of bringing about cultural change. So how do you think hashtag own voices, YA and fantasy authors like yourself can address types of violence against women that women and girls in the authors community or culture experience in particular?
I mean, I think that we have a responsibility with this platform to talk about every every female experience, right? And not just on a cultural spectrum, but also on a spectrum of gender identity. So one thing, for example, in India, we technically have a third gender, and it's something that it's a group of people who have been extremely just prejudiced against and has been oppressed. And those are also female stories. And it's been really humbling to see how Own Voices has become a platform of not just cultural identity, but everyone having a stake in the story. I don't know if I'm explaining it the right way, but I think I don't know. I've been so humbled to be part of this community and to see all the work that they've done, all the ways in which they've tried to uplift other voices. And I think we're only just getting started. So I'm hopeful.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and your voices. Speaking of own voices, so let's talk about female relationships and characters again. Your stories definitely passed the Bechdel test with their depiction of complex and interesting relationships between women and girls. Why do you think many YA authors and fantasy authors in general still have trouble writing stories that pass the Bechdel test, despite the fact that there are so many more things that women and girls talk about other than men?
I think I can't speak for the experiences of other writers, but for example, I'll say this. I remember there was a fairly big review about the Star Touch Queen that talked about how it did not pass the Bechdel test. And it was really interesting to me because at the time, one may feel like really defensive when anybody critiques your work. And at the same time, I realized, that's a really good point. And at the time when I had set out writing the Star Touched Queen, it was really not my intention to consider only how a community of women speak to each other. I was playing with a really strict fairy tale structure. I knew that this was a really deeply individual journey for her. So, and one could argue against whether or not the book passed the test or not, or fell short in some ways and surpassed standards in others. But I think sometimes for so many authors, it's either that women just aren't having enough conversations with other women, or just that in pursuit of perhaps retelling a myth, retelling a fairy tale, which was the perspective I was coming from in the Star Touch Queen, I was not cognizant enough about stuff like that. And I'm really grateful that the community had pointed it out to me and pointed out ways in which I could be better. So I think for the authors and writers who've fallen short in that area, I hope that just like everyone else, they're willing to take criticism and they're willing to learn how by erasing some voices, the narrative that you're spelling out to other people is that this is okay behavior, and it's really not.
Do you have any tips for authors who are making the effort to to write female conversations and relationships realistically but don't know where to start?
Read other books by female authors. If you're struggling with dialogue, you don't understand how to tap into that space or something like that, read often. And also consider other narratives. If you can get your hands on it, download some screenplays. You can pay for them, and I think some of them are even like available online or just part of like Creative Commons or something like that. And take a look at their dialogue and how they treat it, how they get to something emotional and still maintain a conversational tone.
Okay, so while we're still on the topic of writing, there are a couple of fun questions from the audience about your writing.
Great.
So, Lukian offered this. Sorry, Lukian, if I mispronounce your name, my apologies. So Lukian asks, she said, I heard you wrote The Gilded Wolves. Sorry, Lukian, if, I'm not sure if you're a boy or girl or non-binary, but my apologies in advance. You are asking, Roshani, I heard you wrote The Gilded Wolves with a tomato-scented candle. Did you use the same one for writing The Silver Serpents and Book 3?
That is, oh my gosh, that's so funny. Yes, I did use a tomato scented candle. I don't know why, but for me, it's the smell of growing things. It feels like summer in the stem of a vegetable. I don't know. It just is a deeply like earthy smell that to me feels like ripe grounds for writing a story, right? So I did use the same one for writing Silvered Serpents, actually. And for my first draft of book 3, I also used my tomato candle. But recently, I have invested in a whole new candle has, I don't know, strange descriptions like Moroccan mint and something else. And I was like, ooh, it sounds fancy. So perhaps I will lay my tomato candle to rest for different pastures and try out something else.
Where do you get the tomato candle?
I got it from a store called Candlefish, which does ship internationally. So definitely something to pick out. It's wonderful.
Okay, so the next question, also a fun one by Alondra Isabel. Hello, do you have any playlists that we can listen to that have inspired you to write?
I am so fortunate to have readers who make me playlists. And so when they tag me in it, I totally listen. I think it's absolutely fabulous. And it really, the purpose of playlists to me is that it puts me in the headspace to write in the first place. But the thing that I listen to, I often don't listen to music when I'm drafting. I can listen to some music when I'm revising, but instead of songs that have words and stuff, I listen to a lot of film scores. So the Prince of Persia film score is one of my favorites. It's like really fast, super, super fun, and also just extremely dramatic. So it's something that I turn to a lot.
Okay, so let's go back to the discussion. So geek culture in general, including young adult and fantasy, has had its share of critics saying that it's still too male-dominated, despite a rising number of prominent, well-respected, and well-known female authors. Plus, there's still plenty of hostile, misogynist, and sexist behavior by male geeks towards female geeks. So what do you think needs to be done to make geek culture as a whole, whether it's comics or gaming or books, more welcoming for women and girls?
I think having safe spaces on panels are really important. I think female moderators checking in with people far in advance just to make sure that you're okay with other people who are on a panel that you're with is one way to do it. And the other thing is to pay female creators more. Make it so that they're able to get in front of audiences. I think it would be wonderful if we had more scholarships set up that ensured that female creators could get in front of audiences at conferences, festivals, cons, and stuff like that, because they seem like a silent crowd, but they're not. They're extremely powerful, and they're there. They're just waiting for more channels for that visibility to happen.
Mm-hmm. And YA fandom seems to be more female friendly and female dominated than general geek culture. Do you think that YA fandom is a bellwether for what geek culture will be like in the future, or is this just a passing trend?
I hope it's not a passing trend. I think one thing we're noticing about, conversations that have to do with female creators, own voices, diverse voices, paying attention to marginalized voices and all of that, in a way, we've swung the pendulum to a point where, yes, you do have the unfortunate disadvantage of Twitter trolls and lots of people being almost like weirdly attuned to the nuance of certain words and cancel culture and blah, 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 blah. But I think it's just, if there's a phase of anything, that's the ugly phase of it. I think what we're doing is swinging that down to a place where we're just focusing on how do I say it? Focusing on inclusivity and just have that be the norm and have that be the standard. So I do think that we are headed in the right direction for that.
Okay, we still have time for a couple more fan questions, and they are piling in. Thanks everybody for your questions. And so Angel Jenkins has a really cool question. What's your writing inspiration at home? Mine is my back porch on a sunny day.
Oh, well, I am actually in my office right now. So this is a bit of what it looks like. Like trying to position it. It's so weird. I think I get really intimidated by my office after all the work that I put into it and like getting fan art framed and all that sort of stuff. Now I'm just like, oh no, the office is too nice and it's sort of intimidating me. But I do a lot of writing here, and I honestly just do a lot of writing on my couch or in my bed. I think sometimes it just depends. Certain stories want to be written in different places. So at the moment, that's where I'm at.
Okay, and Alondra Isabel has a really interesting question. How do you deal while writing villains? Is it hard for you to give them their voice and play with their minds?
I don't think so. For me, at least, and I know this is true for so many other fabulous writers, you have to remember that a villain is the hero of their own story. And so getting into their heads almost just means understanding how they had all the best intentions and how all of it went severely awry.
Okay. And another interesting question. We're good for time, so let's go to these questions. Your fans ask really, really cool questions.
I have amazing fans. I really do. They are absolutely the best.
So Kirti Suresh asks, I saw one of your interviews where you said the Mahabharata is your favorite poem, and I was wondering which is your favorite Ramayana character.
Ooh, okay. So I would say, okay. All right. So I have a funny answer and then a less funny answer. So one of my favorite characters in the Ramayana is a demon named Kumbhakarna, and he had performed extraordinary penances, and so the gods granted him a boon. And he meant to ask for the ability to destroy, like pretty much everyone. He asked for two things. He asked for destruction, and then he asked for the seat of Indra, the throne of Indra, god of thunder and stuff. But instead of saying Indrasana, he said Nidrasana. So it sounded like a bed for sleeping. That's what it translated into. And then the translation for asking for destruction became sleep instead. So he just slept the whole time was really what happened to him. And that made me giggle just because you must always choose your words wisely. Whether you're a god or a demon or a lowly writer, you must choose your words wisely. Then I'd also say another character that really interested me a lot is the wife of Ravana. Her name was Mandodari, and she's still hailed as one of these like ideal women throughout mythology, and she's just such a tragic character that I would really, really like to see more people tackle retellings from her perspective, what it was like to be married to someone that you love and watch them make all the wrong choices, knowing in a way that their own destiny is stacked against them. What does it mean when your life has turned you into just a tragic observer, something you can't control?
Okay, and I think we have time for a few more questions because they're really fun. So Lukian, who has confirmed that he's a boy, thank you, Lukian, for letting us know. What has been the most fun book to write in each of your respective series?
So, I mean, the strange thing is, for the Star Touch Queen, my favorite book it really is A Crown of Wishes. But it's not my favorite book because I think it's better than the Star Touch Queen or something like that. It's my favorite because it was the second book I ever wrote. And when I was getting ready for my debut book, I had written The Star Touch Queen and I had worked on it for a number of years. And there was no pressure, no timeline, no deadline that came with having that book contracted because it wasn't for so long. And with A Crown of Wishes, it was a lesson in trying to make it in the industry. That this first book that had taken me years to write, now I would have to do the same thing in less than a year, and to make sure that it was just as good, if not better, than the book that came before it. And so that's what made it my favorite. It was a trial by fire, and I'm so deeply proud of everything it taught me that I could do for the rest of my books. So for my other series, they're not quite finished yet, so I'm not sure I can answer that, but I hope that gives you some insight.
All right, and the final question from the audience before we go to our wrap-up question. Keta Narton asks, I'm doing a book report on the Gilded Wolves. What would you say the theme of it is?
I mean, I think it's in the title, gilded, right? When you think about 19th century Paris, a lot of people think this is a place of extraordinary beauty. You think Moulin Rouge, the Eiffel Tower is here, everything's gorgeous. But when you scratch at the surface, you find that that is the time of extraordinary imperialism. For example, the Eiffel Tower was actually built to serve as the entrance to the 1889 Exposition Universelle. And the #1 exhibit at that World Fair was not the Eiffel Tower. It was actually a human zoo. It was called the Negro Village. It attracted 28 million visitors. And the whole point of that experience was to show people that Europe was on a civilizing mission, bringing culture to savages. That's awful, truly awful. And yet it's something that history has repeated itself in many ways. We saw the same thing with the St. Louis World Fair, except their human zoo this time used indigenous Filipinos. And so when I say that the theme is something gilded, I mean that there's a lot of beauty, but you have to hold it hand in hand with the grotesque. And that's something that the characters experience all the time. And so it was something that it was a mindset I really wanted to play with for that book.
All right. So let's go to our wrap-up question, and this is kind of a Captain Obvious question, but we asked this. We asked every author who we've ever hosted this question. You have been so very supportive of our Read for Pixels campaign and our anti-violence against women work as a whole. Why do you support the cause to end violence against women, and what do you think authors can do to help with the cultural change needed to eradicate gender-based violence?
I think it's extremely important to stop violence against women because people so often forget that women are the silent storytellers. We are the unacknowledged vessels of history, the people who are sometimes the tragic observers when the world is outside of our control. And when you harm those voices, you deny and erase a very important part of history. I think what more writers and authors can do is to support organizations and causes like this that are determined to make sure that those stories of women who are harmed are not marginalized, trivialized, and more importantly, not forgotten.
Yeah, and we do have a program actually, everybody. It's called Survivor Stories, and we have helped over 100 women who have survived domestic violence, rape, sexual assault, to tell their stories, to talk about it. And it really helps a lot of other women and girls come forward to know that they are not alone. So women's stories are so important, including your stories, Roshani.
Thank you so much.
I am going to put myself back on screen. Hi, everybody. If you joined while Roshani was talking, this is the disembodied voice. Talk to Roshani.
Huge round of applause for Regina. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And to our fabulous producers in the back, I appreciate you guys so much for making this happen. This was so fun.
And you have generously donated a wonderfully gorgeous Arusha hardcover book bundle to the stash of author goodies that we have up as perks for donors on the Read for Pixels Australia fundraising page. So I'm going to share a little slide now, everybody, to show you where to go. And the producers in the chat box will also share with you the link, so you can just click on it. and go there. Let's see, share screen. Can you see it, Roshani?
Yep, I can.
Okay, so there's only one of this. Roshani only has one bundle available, and it's available to donors in the US only. And you can go to bit.ly/R4P Rally Up IWD 2020 to go get it. It's case sensitive, so make sure to type it in exactly. And you can find out more about the Read for Pixels campaign at bit.ly/Read for Pixels. Again, it's case sensitive. And please give generously. All funds go towards the Pixel Project's work to help end violence against women, including this program where we host authors, some of your favorite authors, including Roshani. And there are plenty more author goodies available from folks like Tamora Pierce and PC Cass and Anna Stevens, Kendara Blake, Leanna Renee Hyber, and more. And new goodies will be released every Friday throughout March. So if you go to our fundraising page, you can bookmark it and check back every Friday, because we've got tons of book bundles and treats coming up throughout the rest of the month. And let me stop screen sharing. Roshani, I believe you have some news to share with everybody for the coming months.
Yes, I do. So although travel is up in the air at the moment with everything going on, and I really, really hope you guys are taking care of yourself and very safe and sound, I'm super excited to tell you that Arushan, the Tree of Wishes, which is book 3 in the Arushan, the End of Time series, is releasing April 7th. And I will be personalizing and signing copies that are purchased through my local independent bookstore, which is Little Shop of Stories. And you can find more of that information on my website, which is www.roshanichokshi.com. So I hope you guys check it out, and I hope you love the next installment in Aru's adventures.
And The Silver Serpents is coming out in September.
Yes. A little bit more time for that book. I can't wait for you guys to read it.
And guess what, you guys? If you are quarantined, Arusha will be the perfect companion for you while you're waiting to come out.
Hopefully. Oh, God. Hopefully I'll still be able to see you guys on tour. Well, fingers crossed that everything works out okay for all of us.
Yeah, fingers crossed. So everybody, thank you so much for being with us today or tonight, wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much, Roshani, for being with us. And we'll say good night now to everybody. Or good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are. It's afternoon in Australia, I think. So everybody, please follow Roshani on Twitter so you can get more of her latest updates, and and check out her books if you are new to her books. So everybody, good night wherever you are.